If you like what you watch, then don't forget to follow us on Facebook and Twitter for the latest updates on The More Show. Remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel for new weekly television and radio shows.
The comments and views expressed on The More Show are those of the people that make them and do not necessarily reflect the views of Kevin Moore, The More Show, or this radio station and its affiliates or sponsors.
Good evening, I'm your host Kevin Moore, and you're now listening to The More Show, which is sponsored by the UFO Matrix magazine. For this next hour, I'll cover subjects of an alternative variety that most shows do not touch. On today's show, I'm about to be joined with UFO researcher Chuck Wade, where we'll discuss information about his father's encounter with Mac Brazel and the Foster Ranch, the purported site of the famous Roswell UFO crash in 1947. Now, Chuck was born and raised in Corona, New Mexico, and received his bachelor's degree in civil engineering from New Mexico State University. He is the owner of Wade Building Co. in Gallup, New Mexico, and it's a pleasure to have Chuck on the show with us today. Chuck, how are you doing?
I'm doing just great, thank you, and I really appreciate being on the show with you this evening.
So, Chuck, what sort of got you into ufology?
First off, I was born and raised in the little town of Corona, New Mexico. And for those that don't know, Corona is right in the center of New Mexico and about 100 miles northwest of Roswell and about 30 miles southeast of Corona is where the Roswell incident occurred, the first UFO that we know of that crashed. And whenever it did crash there, a gentleman by the name of Mac Brazel, who is the foreman of the Foster Ranch, he found this parts and pieces out there on the ranch, and he didn't know what it was. So he came to Corona to get my father to go out to the ranch and look it over. Unfortunately, Dad did not go with Mac, but I've heard about this basically all my life.
So this sort of basis here, this sort of story that your father told you, was one of the key elements that got you into wanting to study ufology as a sort of hobby.
That is definitely correct. And then I had heard about this verbally all these many years. And then in 1980, the book The Roswell Incident by Charles Berlitz and William Moore and researched by Mr. Stanton Friedman, it came out, and there it was in print about what I had heard all these many years. So I became a student of the UFO phenomenon.
Okay, so when we talk about the Roswell incident, we're talking about a crashed craft, apparently, that crashed in Roswell, New Mexico, is that right?
It was about 80 miles northwest of Roswell. It's where the Roswell incident crashed. We'll call this the Roswell incident.
Okay.
It's the Corona debris field, where these parts and pieces were scattered over a very vast area, hundreds of meters wide and, well, about a kilometer, more than a kilometer long, just lots and lots of debris.
Was the Corona debris field, was that the field where the first crash took place, if there was a first or second one?
In reality, Kevin, I think it was the second crash. Second, third, or fourth. Because the first crash happened 2 days sooner than the one at Corona. And it was over on the plains of St. Augustine, which is, it's west of Socorro in the central New Mexico area, but it's west of the Rio Grande River. And I do believe that was the first one that came down. Then 2 days later, there were three UFOs that crashed basically within a minute of each other. The one there at the Corona debris field and one north of Roswell about 40 miles. And that one was basically totally intact. There was a hole in it, but it was basically intact. And then another one that was 53 miles west of Roswell. And we'll call that the Jim Ragsdale site. And it was also intact with a hole in it. So there were 4 UFOs, not just one.
So when people think of the Roswell incident, and if we were to, I don't know, watch a film on the Sci-Fi Channel regarding the Roswell incident, you're saying there's not just one crash as they always sort of talk about. There was actually 5 that took place in the same time frame, or 4.
There were 4 in 1947 and 1 in 1948. In March 1948, there was a UFO craft crashed near Aztec, New Mexico, and Aztec is in the northwest part of New Mexico, close to what they call the Four Corners, where
Right.
the 4 states of New Mexico, Colorado, Utah, and Arizona come together.
Okay, now the 4 that crashed in 1947, is the theory then behind those crashes, did they happen on the same sort of time frame, the same sort of days? That's what I'm getting to. I mean, how far apart were these particular 4 crashes?
2 days. Very close to the 2nd of July, 1947, a crash happened on the plains of St. Augustine, and then 2 days later, the night of the 4th of July, there were 3 UFO crashes. The Corona debris field crash, the crash north of Roswell, and the crash west of Roswell.
Right. So when we talk about your father's story, and Mac Brazel asking your father to come along to the ranch to see what had crashed, this would have only been one of the debris fields, and unbeknown to him, there would have been 4 others out there.
That is correct. Dad never knew of the other. Well, he didn't know about the one in Aztec either. So Dad knew of 1 of 5.
Just going back to the original question, when people normally think of Roswell UFO, what particular crash site do they normally refer to?
I would say they're referring to the Corona debris field because that is really well known. Later on, we can go into detail of why it was well known.
Sure, okay. So, going back to your father's story then, how well did he know Mac Brazel?
Very well. My dad owned a bar or a tavern or a nightclub, or what do you want to call it? We call it a bar.
Sure.
Where you serve liquor. And Mac Brazel would come in and visit with Dad for many years. And then Bill and Shirley Brazel, Bill is Mac Brazel's son, and Bill and Shirley lived in Alaska for several years. And then I'd say it was somewhere around 1945 or something. They came back to New Mexico. And I've known Bill for many years. I also knew Bill's brother, Vernon. Vernon is often mentioned in books, but we do not know what happened to Vernon. He just sort of disappeared. But we've known the Brazels for many years.
And did you know them as a boy yourself?
Yeah, I was 7 years old in 1947.
Yeah. Okay. So tell us the story then of what detail there is really of when your father was outside in the bar on that day, shall I say, and the sort of state that Mac Brazel was in, and was he excited?
Yeah, Dad, and I can remember very well Dad standing out front of the bar because he ran it many, many hours a day. And so in the mornings, he would stand out in front of the bar there and get some sunshine. And he was standing there whenever Mac Brazel came driving in his old pickup, and Mac was really excited of something had crashed on the ranch. And he really, really wanted my dad to go out and see what was there. But unfortunately, Dad turned him down. But also, Mac went up to the drugstore there in town where they sell prescription and ice creams and all, and talked with the people that own that place. And she made a phone call to the sheriff over in Chaves County. Turned out to be Sheriff Wilcox. So Mrs. Perkins helped Mac Brazel make a phone call to the sheriff. And she's told me that in person twice. So he really was trying to get people to go out to see what was out there. And Dad suggested that Mac go to the military because that's who he thought would need to know. Fortunately, Mac went to the sheriff, and that is very, very important.
Right.
That he went to the sheriff.
So, I mean, did he talk about what he'd seen out there, or could he just kind of describe what he had understood that he had seen? I mean...
Well, Dad never mentioned about that, but I have talked personally. My mother and I went out to talk to Loretta Proctor, and you'll read about Loretta in the books, that her husband Floyd and Loretta Proctor and their children lived just a very few miles, maybe 10 miles from the Corona debris field. But my mother and I went out and visited with Loretta, and Loretta told Mother and I about Mac Brazel coming to their house and showing them the pieces that he had retrieved from that crash. There's metal, and there's a balsa wood-looking stuff that really was interesting to Loretta, for Floyd always had a very sharp knife, and he took out his knife and he could not cut that, quote, balsa wood. He couldn't even scratch it. And then he took out matches and it wouldn't burn. It was really perplexing to him. So I've actually talked to Loretta, and Loretta Proctor is still living at Corona, New Mexico, and I'm proud to say that. One of her sons lives here in the Gallup area.
And I suppose they've been interviewed quite a bit extensively about the that particular day, haven't they?
I know that Loretta has. I've seen her on quite a number of different films that I've seen, and I don't know about the children at all, but they were ever interviewed.
So,
and Dee Proctor, the gentleman, the little boy that was with Mac whenever he found it, he passed away about 3 years ago now. And roughly 5 years ago, Mac's son, Bill Brazel, passed away.
Did they ever sign an affidavit to say what they had seen?
I don't know. I've never read one, I'll say that.
Okay. You knew Bill. You knew Bill.
I knew him rather well.
Was he making it up?
Oh, absolutely not. In fact, in the book, The Roswell Incident, there is a picture of Bill Brazel, and there is a caption under this picture, and I'll just read it to the audience.
Sure, go ahead.
Bill Brazel, son of the rancher W. Brazel, Bill's collection of the disc fragments was confiscated by the Air Force in 1949 after Bill had said too much the evening before in a tavern in Corona. That tavern they spoke of was my dad's bar. And whenever I read this in the book, before I even turned the page, I phoned Bill.
Yeah.
He lived in Capitan, New Mexico, just about maybe 60 miles from Corona. And I talked to Bill for quite some time, and my father had just passed away a couple years prior to this book coming out. My dad died in 1978, and the book came out in 1980. So Bill wanted to know how my mother was faring and just good things. And then I asked Bill, I'm going to read the article or the caption under the picture in the book, The Roswell Incident, and I did. And then I asked him point blank, Bill, is this true? And he said yes. I have been a student of the Roswell Incident and finding out what's in our skies of the UFOs since that moment. That was in 1981 or so.
So that was the point that you turned around and said, this is real.
That's absolutely correct. Before, it was all hearsay. Here's the guy that actually saw and had parts of this UFO in my dad's bar. I have no question in my mind. And I'm sure that Loretta Proctor would not lie to my mother.
No.
Because my mother and Loretta were childhood friends. They went to school together. They'd known each other all their life.
Let's reverse this a bit. Let's look at the time frame that it happened in 1947. Now, these were people of a different era, and they were very loyal to the country. And why would they lie, I suppose?
I'd say absolutely no reason to lie about it. I would say, to tell us that something other than a UFO crashed there.
Yeah.
If they were doing anything, they would have said nothing.
Now, when Mac Brazel went down to the debris site on the Corona, did he ever talk about seeing bodies, or?
It's kind of mentioned that way in the article that's in the paper, the Roswell paper, and I believe it's July the 8th, 1947. He mentioned the body there, but we just don't know much about the bodies at all.
No, okay. There. So with Mac Brazel, You mentioned earlier on that he had some debris that he'd maybe removed from the site and they were confiscated off him.
That was Bill Brazel, his son.
Sorry, Bill Brazel.
Yeah, Bill Brazel. And apparently he told, or somebody listened in on the conversation there at my dad's bar that night, and then they must have called the military in Roswell or someplace, and the military came out to the ranch and requested that they see what parts and pieces that Bill had, and then they took it.
Right.
They asked him for permission to take it, and they did, and they never returned it.
So, do you know if anyone was even threatened by anyone for talking about this subject? I mean,
I would say definitely yes. I've talked to him personally.
And this was Bill that was actually, told to keep it quiet.
Yes, I never talked to him about being kept quiet, but there are other people that were told very definitely not to mention it.
Right, so obviously they'd witnessed a lot more than what Bill had seen, or Bill's father probably. So we've got 4 crashes. This is very unusual. Planetary visitors from elsewhere having, crashing. I mean, why would they come all this way just to crash? What's the cause behind them coming down all at once?
I feel very confident to tell you that the United States military disabled these UFO crafts using high-powered radar intentionally. They didn't just crash on their own. They were shot down by the United States military.
High-powered radar? I mean, were these portable radar? Were they fixed? I mean, where were these radars?
I can tell you a little story about the radars. Whenever they put in the Los Alamos here in northern New Mexico, the government put in 3 very high-powered radars to guard the skies over Los Alamos. There was one up by the Colorado border, one here near Gallup at the Arizona border, and then one not too far northwest of Corona at a little town called Moerity. And in those days, in the 1947, they didn't have missiles, and they most likely didn't even have a gun that would shoot down a plane. But they put these radars in to shoot down planes and guard the skies over Los Alamos National Laboratories.
What would a radar have done to a normal plane?
It would mess up their instrumentation.
Okay.
And these were high-powered. They use radar now, but it's very, very low-powered. These are really high-powered things. And the radar that was put in Moerity was a mobile unit, so it could be moved. And I think very strongly what happened, well, first off, the whole Roswell incident in 1947 happened only 2 weeks after Kenneth Arnold saw those 8 or so crafts up in the northwest of the United States. And people really and truly didn't know what was going on. So a couple weeks before they shot them down here in New Mexico, they knew that they were up in the northwest part of the United States. And also, in July of this year, a Sergeant Earl Fulford, Fulford, came forward and said that he was a military person stationed in Roswell in 1947, and he physically went out to the debris field. From that, Mr. Fulford was interviewed December the 3rd of 2008 by Bill Burns from the UFO Hunter, and Mr. Fulford said that there were 3 UFOs had flown over the Roswell, at that time, Army Air Force. So he physically saw 3 UFOs come over that base before any of the crafts were shot down. So the military knew that there were UFOs flying in our skies in the Roswell area. And they must have had a report that a UFO was flying on the plains of St. Augustine. So I think that the military took that mobile unit from Moerity, New Mexico, just south and a little bit west, to the plains of St. Augustine, and they set that unit up as a high-powered shooter, and then they must have had several low-powered radars that could track. So here came a UFO, also middle of the night. They hit that UFO with that high-powered radar, and it really disabled it. And then they took these small radar units and tracked it to ground, so they knew where it hit. And why I say that's important, because the plain to San Augustine is about 1,200 square miles of just mountains and valleys and lake beds and all that. The military showed up the next morning. Within 12 hours, the military was there with a fleet of trucks, cranes, tankers, and all that to gather up a crashed UFO.
Yeah.
How did that happen in 12 hours?
The place is massive. It's a huge landscape, isn't it? We're not talking a small, couple of football fields here. We're talking probably
1,200 square miles.
Yeah.
I have no idea how many kilometers.
Yeah,
it is, but
it's a lot. Yeah, it's vast, exactly. So to turn up like that, no, they must have been pretty prepared for what was about to happen. Tell us about the other crashes then. How quickly were they retrieved?
The next morning was one of them. And there are eyewitnesses on, let's say, the night of the 4th of July, 1947. These two kids were riding with their mother coming from Carlsbad, New Mexico, which is in the southeast part of New Mexico. And they were traveling at night because it gets really hot, and they had no air conditioner in those days. So they got up close to Roswell, and they saw three major flashes in the sky. They could recall that the flashes lit up the mountains and just a vast area. And there were three of them. And that's really important because there were three UFOs that were crashed. And why I can say that is, and I will say that the first craft that came down went to the Jim Ragsdale site, which is 53 miles west of Roswell. Jim Ragsdale and his girlfriend were spending the weekend there, north slope of the Capitan Mountains. It's a beautiful area. And it was about 11 o'clock at night or so, and they physically saw a major flash off to the north. And Jim worked for a pipeline company putting in natural gas pipelines.
Yeah.
And he said that flash was as bright as a welder's arc. That is bright. And then they physically saw this craft coming in and crashing right there within 100 yards of where they were at. And whenever it was coming in, it was making all kinds of noises, and it was very bright. And I think whatever creates the electromagnetic forces on that craft was still operating, but it was all shorted out. It was just all disabled, and it was just, well, like maybe plug a plug in, you have a big flash.
Yeah.
Well, these flashes were just happening, and it was making a lot of noise like a spark does. Well, they physically saw and heard this thing coming in and crash, and then they waited a little bit and went over to visit with these guys. It turns out there's a hole in this craft, and there were 4 dead aliens in it. And I have a videotape of Jim Ragsdale telling his daughter, being filmed by his son-in-law, of what happened there. I have the tape. And It's called Naked Truth.
What were the next ones sort of after that? I mean...
the next morning, they went back, Jim and his girlfriend went back over to the craft right after sunup, and they were gathering up parts and pieces of this craft, and they had a tow sacks full, or 2 gunny sacks full of these parts and pieces, and here came the military. How did the military find that craft overnight whenever my brother and I had a map and we almost couldn't find it?
And that's nowadays.
The military shot this craft down, they triangulated, they knew where it hit, and they came and got it the next morning. So that was the second craft that crashed. And then the Corona debris field, Mac Brazel reported it to the sheriff of Chaves County, Sheriff Wilcox. And then Sheriff Wilcox told the military there at Roswell Walker Base. And then here came the military. They went out there, and there was just a lot of people involved. I know civilians that went out there. I have a nephew. He was involved. Anyway, there's a whole lot of people knew about the Corona debris field, so let's call that the third one that crashed. But there's also the one that's north of Roswell, about 40 miles north of Roswell, and this craft is also mentioned in Colonel Philip Corso's book called The Roswell Incident. And what happened on the Roswell incident, it was also shot down the same time as the Jim Ragsdale, the Corona debris field, and then there's one north of Roswell. But what happened is that some civilians found this craft, and they reported it into the military. And the military came out to that craft north of Roswell, and it was basically intact. There's a hole in it and 4 dead aliens. But it was basically intact. And the military immediately loaded that craft onto a flatbed truck and hauled it to the base, and we know very little about it because the military hauled it off. But it wasn't very big. It was only about 14 to 15 foot long, not quite as wide, and about 6 foot high. And that's right out of the affidavit that Walter Hott made in 2002.
Incredible. So we've got 3 there, and there was one more, wasn't there, that we mentioned?
The one on the plains
of San Augustine.
San Augustine.
Okay.
Let me correct myself. Colonel Corso's book is The Day After Roswell.
Okay.
I'm not sure what I said, but it wasn't this. Colonel Corso's book's The Day After Roswell.
Corso's book, you're saying, just specializes in the Roswell incident mainly, not the other 3 incidents that took place.
It's very specific to the one north of Roswell. Colonel Corso was in the Pentagon, serving as on the Foreign Technology Desk, and a 3-star general assigned Colonel Corso with a filing cabinet full of parts and pieces, that came from that UFO craft that crashed north of Roswell, about 40 miles north of Roswell. Okay. So that's why Colonel Corso was involved. He physically had parts and pieces of this craft in the Pentagon. He really doesn't know, or did not mention in his book, about any of the other crashes. He was very specific on the one north of Roswell, and I'll call that the 4th craft that crashed.
Now, you met Philip Corso, did you not, in your travels?
Yeah. My wife Nancy and I met Philip Corso, or Colonel Corso, in Roswell on the 50th anniversary of these crashes in July 1997.
Right, okay. Now, when you met Corso, did you ever talk to him about the other 3 crashes that took place that day?
I basically did not know about them myself in those.
Okay.
So I did not know about them because, the information wasn't out there.
Wasn't out there, right, okay. And when you met Corso, now we're going to put a link for his book on our website as well, but when you met Corso, how did he come across to you? I mean...
Oh, what a wonderful gentleman. I spent totally 30 years with the Navy, and just to be able to talk to a colonel, and then a colonel of his stature and abilities, it was just wonderful.
I mean, what's your views when someone turns around to you when you get to meet someone like that in your presence, and they tell you, that they've written this wonderful book, The Day After Roswell? How are they allowed to talk? What allows them to be able to disclose when they've signed the Official Secrecy Act?
That Secrecy Act has been gone out of existence for quite a number of years now. That there is no Secrecy Act. People may think that, but it officially does not exist.
Would this have been the case for Corso? I mean, how do you view his being able to talk about what he did talk about?
He has no right to secrecy. He has no reason to have secrets of this subject.
Right, but
nothing the military or the government can do to him.
So you're saying the actual Secrecy Act nowadays doesn't exist as it used to?
That is correct, and it hasn't for quite a number of years. Good news, Kevin, is that our new president has just signed a presidential order to declassify very much of the classified items that the governments have. Before, we've had to go through a Freedom of Information Act and sign papers and all that. Very hard to do. But with this new declassifying, the president said that if you have it, turn it loose. people do not even have to ask for it. If you got it, tell them. And I can hardly wait for the next year, 2, 5 years on what's going to come out, because the government has been studying and back engineering UFOs since 1947.
Oh.
Now, I understand they won't turn everything over. Some of the stuff should stay classified. But just the retrieving of a UFO should be declassified immediately. We need to know what happened.
We'll come back to that, but just going back to the last subject as well, with the crash, the 4 crashes that occurred back in 1947, were there any bodies that were recovered that were living? Were there any beings living out of these 4 crashes, or was there any talk of anything?
The craft that I'm very familiar with, and I physically have on my desk here parts of that craft, there were 3 dead aliens and 1 live, L-I-V-E, alien. And I have physically talked and shook hands with a gentleman that was there as a child, saying that there was 1 live alien at that crash site.
Okay, and does he remember what kind of state it was in? I mean, was it...
Yes, he was very, very agitated, and also very protective of his comrades that were at that time even dead, but he was still protective. And whenever the military come up, he became agitated, but he did not get up and leave. He stayed there with his comrades, but he was definitely alive.
Incredible. What do you think happened to the recovered debris from the 4 crashes, and where did they end up?
Kevin, that's a $64 million question. I wished I knew. But if I had to guess, and I will guess, that the planes of San Augustine craft went to California. I believe that very strongly. But I can't prove that whatsoever, so that's just an educated guess.
Okay.
Where the others went, I absolutely do not know.
Well, there's a lot of theory out there, a lot of speculation that a lot of this stuff went to Wright Force Air Patterson Base.
Yes. Well, there is a very good chance that the small craft that crashed north of Roswell went on site into a B-52 bomber, or whatever number it is, and went to, let's say, Wright-Patterson. But I will tell you, I was in the audience on the 4th of July this year whenever Sergeant Earl Fuford was interviewed, and he was 80-some years old, and I passed my condolences. He passed away in August, 1 month later. But Mr. Fuford said that he was a forklift driver and operator, and he physically took a very large crate from the hangar out to the runway where they would load it onto an aircraft. So there could have been an intact UFO with a hole in it that he helped load onto that aircraft. I was in the audience whenever he said that.
You did a dig in June 2004, is that right? Would you tell us a bit about the dig that you did?
Oh, I'd love to. In March of 2004, I went to the symposium in Aztec, New Mexico, which they've been studying now for several years, where a 100-foot diameter craft came down intact, totally intact. And there were 16 people dead on that craft, 16 aliens dead on it. One of the speakers at the Aztec Symposium was a Mr. Art Campbell from the state of Oregon. Mr. Campbell was telling and showing parts and pieces that he had retrieved from the plains of St. Augustine UFO crash site. And I was determined to make friends, and did make friends with Mr. Campbell. And because I live just about 100 miles north of this crashed site at a little town of Gallup, New Mexico. So I became friends with Mr. Campbell, and we decided we'd make an archaeological dig at that crash site. And I volunteered to hire a crew, and I did, of 4 men. And then my wife, my brother, and Mr. Campbell, and a couple other people. So there's 9 of us there. And I made 4 tripods with 12-foot legs and big baskets to shake dirt, and then these baskets have a screen on the bottom where it leaves the bigger pieces in the basket and gets rid of the dirt. And being this was a dry lake bed, there was an awful lot of dirt.
Yeah.
And fortunately, some pieces. So in May, we gathered up, the 9 of us went down on the plains of St. Augustine, set up our tripods, and started digging. And the first day, we dug just all big area, because we knew where Mr. Campbell had found these parts. But we wanted to see if there's other areas that something might be in, because we just gave a lot of thought for
Yeah,
the day
sure.
we dug. We didn't find a thing out there. But then on Sunday, we in the afternoon, after doing everything in all these dry holes, we set a tripod over precisely where Mr. Campbell had dug, and we immediately started finding pieces. And I physically have on my desk, as I talk with you, Kevin, and your audience, parts and pieces from that UFO craft.
Wow. Again, let's remind our audience that crashed at the St. Augustine site in 1947.
Yeah, I'm going to say specifically July the 2nd.
July the 2nd, 1947, right. Now, you say they're parts from a recovered, parts from the crash debris. Two questions then. One, why didn't the U.S. Army, when they were brushing the sort of debris field, pick this up? Because, I mean, they must have gone over it with a fine tooth comb.
I would say that they weren't as thorough as they were at Corona.
Okay.
And also, whenever this craft came in, it made a ditch in the ground, a trench. And no telling how deep some of these parts went into the ground, 3 or 4 inches or something, and they may not have been visible, because this thing landed with a tremendous amount of force. We have a piece that I think is the outside skin of the craft, and that thing is hard like you wouldn't believe. And it's just tore all to pieces. It just has let's call it, triangular pieces sticking out of itself, and these things are turned back and flattened. It took a tremendous force to do that. So I think that they were just parts and pieces down in there that may not have even shown, and even if they did show, they were small, so they just took the shovels and shoveled and filled it up.
With these parts of the debris that you say you have, which I've seen the pictures of as well, to be honest, did you get them analyzed?
I've had them analyzed one time in cross-section, where the scientist that did it, he stood the pieces up in a little dish and then put epoxy around them, and then he cut the dish off where it was flat, and then he polished that surface, and then he put it into a scanning electron microscope and looked at the center part of it. And my goodness, there's nothing made on this earth that looks anything like that. It's about 91% aluminum. I'll repeat, 91% aluminum. But there are particles of iron. They're particles. They were not heated up and melted and mixed like you would anticipate something being mixed, like you mixed iron and aluminum. But these are particles, and they're micron size, but some of them are up to 3 and 4 microns across. What is really neat is that these foils are different thicknesses. They're all the way from less than 20 microns up to 65 microns, and that's really thin. About 20 microns or so is what your aluminum foil in your house is. But whenever you look at the side of that foil that's, let's say, 20 microns across, and there's a piece of iron in there that's 2 or 3 microns thick, the scientists call those boulders. And that absolutely tears up the way aluminum is made by running liquid aluminum out of a tiny, tiny little hole, and then it spreads out and becomes foil. But with a great big old boulder of iron, it would stop up that little bitty hole. So they don't know how this stuff was made.
Are the pieces that you've got, are they brittle? Are they light? What are they?
They're not brittle. You can twist them and move them and wiggle them back and forth. And audience, this metal does not come back flat like the metal that came off of the other 3 crashed over there by Roswell. This right here is crinkled, or I think that they ran it through some sort of a crinkling machine, and then physically took another machine and flattened it out, because a lot of these bends are 180 degrees flat. So this stuff was made to look like this. It just did not happen. And you can see this stuff very, very well on Mr. Ken Lima, Kenlima. Ken has got a photo bucket out in California that he's putting the pictures of this metal onto his photo bucket, and I think your audience would really enjoy looking at these. And Kevin, can you put this onto your website?
Of course.
This photo bucket. I'll give you the exact. Yeah, I'll email you the very specifics. Ken is doing a marvelous job of putting this up where people can really see what was not made on this earth. And also, I've been talking about the iron. About 6% of that foil is iron. There is 3% silicon. And what's really unusual about silicon being in aluminum is aluminum and silicon are basically incompatible. So where you have a piece of silicon, there's a great big old hole. So it cannot be used for a whole lot of things, like a virus or a bacteria. You could get in that hole, so it could not be used in medical or anything, or a kitchen or anything. But anyway, you don't want 3% silicon and foils. The standards for foils, like is in your kitchen, is like 98 or 99% pure.
Yeah.
Whereas this stuff here is 91% aluminum, 6% iron, and 3% silicon. And I've been in contact with aluminum people like Alcoa Aluminum. I've been in contact with the Aluminum Association. They have not seen anything even remotely like this. So if anybody knows something about it, I'd love to hear. And also, I'd like to offer, if any of you folks has a laboratory that can look down to the nano size, I would certainly be glad to furnish you a piece of this metal to look at the nano size. That's going to be really important. But I can't find anybody to analyze it down to nano.
So are we saying then that back in 47, that these materials, we wouldn't have known what they were anyway, so that it couldn't have come from that era? Is that what you're saying?
No way it could come from that era, because they don't even know how to make it now. There's no way that this material could be made on this earth with gravity. Like that great big old piece of iron in there, well, it's out in the middle of that little bit of foil. Let's say a 30 piece of micron size foil, which is not very thick, and you put a 3 or 4 micron piece of iron out there, it's going to go to the bottom immediately. But this stuff is out in the middle.
So, I mean, has this invoked your interest to want to go back out there and, dig up some more? I mean, would you want to go back? I mean, do you think there must be...
I would go this afternoon, but I'm not. No. Actually, we did go back in 2005.
Okay.
Mr. Campbell, another engineer, myself, and another gentleman. The 4 of us went out there on 2005, and we were standing on site. We just got there, and Mr. Campbell got in the emergency medical call that he had to return to Oregon. So Mr. Campbell and the engineer left the site after about 2 hours, and the worker and I dug. Well, we set up our tripod that evening, right above basically where we was at the year before, but we did not dig at all that evening. And then we went out the next morning, and we started finding pieces shortly. And we dug for a short period of time. We had enough pieces. Hell, we don't know how many is there, and we certainly don't want to dig them all up. So we stopped after just a couple, 3 hours. I know exactly where it is. I know there were pieces there when we left. I have pieces. And we're not going to dig again until we can make a documentary showing the stuff coming out of the ground.
Yeah, that's a good idea. That's a very good idea.
Certainly do not want to dig up all the pieces.
No, not at all. Now, I read an article that you'd written a couple of years back now, I think it was, where you talk about UFOs do not need oil. Why do we? Now you've got theories on alternative energy. Could you just sort of go over them briefly with us and what your theories are?
Yes, I would be happy to. And it's snowing out here. Whenever we started this clear,
Incredible.
It's snowing like crazy.
It's snowing in New Mexico.
Well, it snows a lot here. We're up in the mountains.
Yeah, you're up in the mountains. Yeah, beautiful.
What my theory is that the UFO crafts run with electromagnetic energy. And this energy is a whole section of physics that is not being taught. Absolutely not being taught. And we must go to a brand of physics called energy from the vacuum. And that is everywhere in the universe we look out and we see nothing. Like we can look from here to the moon and see nothing. That area between us and the moon and the end of the universe is chocked full of energy. But it's in virtual form. Virtual means you cannot see it. You can't. For all practical purposes, that we know stuff that's virtual, it doesn't exist. But it does exist in a form that we cannot see, measure, nor use. What we must do is find ways to use the energy from the vacuum and use it. In reality, we already do that. But the formulas and the way we look at science, physics, and electrical engineering is all totally obsolete, especially electrical engineering. You folks out there have been hoodwinked. If you're an electrical engineer, get out your books and burn them. And go and find the correct way to do energy. The electrical engineer says the vacuum is inert, I-N-E-R-T, and that's a bold-faced lie, L-I-E. What that is, that energy is, it's just massive amounts of energy. But the electrical engineering does not recognize it, therefore we do not use it as such. What we must do is use energy from the vacuum and get on with solving our energy problems. And I know from years of study, of how to make energy, electrical energy without using oil. And part of it is going to be, what's so important about the foil is, that foil is going to find out that is the propulsion system of a UFO. Those little nano-sized particles that I've never seen because I can't get anybody to analyze it, those little nano-sized particles are going to start vibrating at some frequency, and they're going to draw in energy from the vacuum, become usable energy, and propel that UFO. And I think it's going to be as simple as that, to propel a UFO with the right frequency and, correctly engineered.
Yeah.
But that foil is going to be the propulsion system of a UFO.
And was there any sort of backing that you got for this theory? I mean, is this theories that you've sort of, recognized from other people's work and put it together piece by piece, or was it?
None of this is my original theories. The theories I'm working with is a Dr. Tom Bearden.
Right. Okay.
And his website is just vast and is phenomenal. And I'll spell it. I can't pronounce it. CHENIERE.com.
Okay, we'll put that on our website as well. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, Dr. Bearden and his thinking is just phenomenal. And people will just go to Dr. Bearden's website and solve these problems, because we know the problems, we know the solutions, we just haven't got them together yet. We can solve this energy problem.
So do you think from all the decades of having the saucer crafts, all the reverse engineering that would have took place, do you believe that we've uncovered some big truths from the reverse engineering, or do you think we're still struggling with what we actually have? I mean,
being that I don't know the final project, but yes, I know. I would wager they've been back engineering, and I think that they have in the black ops stuff that we can't even imagine what they have. And what we need to do is get it out for our use, rather than using oil. We can use the energy from the vacuum. And I will tell you what I discussed, or one item I discussed with Colonel Philip Corso.
Sure, go ahead.
Before Nancy and I got to Roswell in July of 1997, I had already read his book the day after Roswell. And I was determined to find Colonel Corso, and I did talk with him. And he signed my book and a book for the governor of the state of New Mexico. And then I started talking, I mentioned that I was interested in alternative energy. And he said, I have something that I think would be of interest to the governor. So Colonel Corso sent me a package of information, so I became a courier for Colonel Philip Corso. And for you folks that can read that book there and think that that doesn't happen, up until now, did you know that I was a courier for Colonel Corso? One of the items I took to the governor, and I still have copies, it was in that brown envelope I gave you, and Hoffman, was that Colonel Corso was the commanding officer of a missile base on the north end of White Sands Missile Base called the Red Canyon Missile Base. And Colonel Corso was a commanding officer there in the mid-50s. And Los Alamos National Laboratory brought a large, Colonel Corso said it's about a 6-foot cube, weighed about 6 ton, device to his base, and they dug a hole about 30 feet in the ground and buried this device, and the only thing that came out of the ground was electricity. And whenever they buried it up, and they started it up, and they said that device would deliver or make electricity for at least 30 years without refueling or with no operation. And in that, for the next 6 months or so, that device helped power his base. And then the Los Alamos came back down and dug up that device, took it back to Los Alamos, and destroyed it. Colonel Corso, it really ticked him off because he said that device was ready to go to the market. Wouldn't it have been fun if we had had this powering device on the market since 1955? We have been taken for a ride, folks. It's time we get off that roller coaster and get our feet under ourselves, use the energy from the vacuum through the formulas and stuff we will come up with, and stop using fuel to make electricity.
So what was this device? I mean, did he describe what he thought it was? I mean,
in the information, he called it a reactor. But I, in my mind, think that it could not have been a reactor because absolutely the only thing that a reactor does that I know of is create heat. And anytime you create heat, you have to have a cooling system to dissipate the heat, to get it back down from steam to water, to run through the steam cycle, to get the power out of it, to run a generator. The only thing these big old nuclear power plants are so proud of, the only thing that the nuclear does is create heat. It creates heat very efficiently, but there's not 1 watt of power made directly from nuclear power. Nuclear power only produces heat.
Yeah.
And therefore, this device that they buried on his base was not a reactor as we know it because it did not have a heat dissipating system. So I don't know what it was, but I sure would love to know. And I think that we need to know. I think it's our money that we, the people, money that built that thing, I think we, the people, need to be able to use it.
It's a complete shame that Corso obviously died so early. Was it 1990 he died or 98? I can't.
No, he died 1 year after that. He died very specifically, July the 16th, 1998.
It would have been fascinating to have a sort of round table and to interview and to have him included as well. I mean, what a guy to have seen what he saw.
Yes, I fully agree. I talked to him a few times during that year, and then he had another package of information for the governor, and I was to meet him in Roswell in 98. And I talked to him just not too long before I went to Roswell, and whenever I got to Roswell, turned out he had had a massive heart attack. Wasn't there, obviously. But he died July the 16th. And what's so important about July the 16th, that was the same day of the year that the United States detonated the first atomic bomb, July the 16th, 1945. And then, that was also the day my youngest brother passed away, July 16th, 1943.
So there's a significance in the date for you there, obviously, yes. Well, we'll have to wrap it up there because we're coming to the end of the hour. But I'm just a couple more questions for you, and I've left these to the last, really, because I just want to get your reaction on what you think of them. Chuck, what's it mean to you? What's it mean that we've been visited?
I think it's absolutely wonderful. I can't even conceive of all that space without life. And why would there be space without life? And I think we're all God's children, and we need to communicate. And I really and truly believe we need to get along. We don't need to mess with those people in war and all that like we're stupidly doing that to ourselves. And I'm a career military. I just think it will be wonderful whenever we know what those people know and they know what we know. But I think they know a lot about us because if I was to guess, I would say we are them. I do not believe in evolution on this earth. I think that we were planted here, and we could be their ant farm or we could be their neighbor. They're looking out for us. But I fully can hardly wait, and I hope that I will stick around long enough to absolutely know what's in our skies.
I hope...
70 years old now, so I hope that it'll be rather soon.
70 years younger, that's what you mean, Chuck?
Yeah, and I feel great, and I really, really appreciate being on this radio show.
Some people find it very hard to conceive the difference it would make to their life on an individual basis to know that, they've been here already and that we have been observed. What could you say to those people who find it very difficult to come to grips with, what's it mean for me, really? What difference is it going to make in my life?
I would say get your head out of the sand just like an ostrich. I just don't understand, and I wish that, I don't even want to know. They are just out of touch with reality because those folks are here, and let's learn from them. Let's use their technology and getting us off of oil. There's so many things that we could learn from those folks, and it would just set science ahead maybe hundreds, if not thousands of years. And we're going to be on this planet for a long, long time, I would hope.
Yeah.
And we must stop polluting it. I don't believe in global warming at all. That whole thing is a cycle. But we need to stop polluting our air. That's idiotic to continue polluting our air. That doesn't cause global warming, but it will hurt everything. It hurts everything. Let's stop polluting. But also let's not spend all this money on global warming trying to change the weather because we can't change it. We can certainly adapt to it. And there's where our money should be. But we need to absolutely get with these folks and become friends, like Mr. Campbell and I did.
Okay.
A lot of good came out of our friendship.
Well, look, Chuck, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on, and we'll definitely get you back on again in the future.
It will be my pleasure. I'm at your beck and call.
To find out more on Chuck Wade, go to my website, themoreshow.co.uk, and look up Chuck under past guests. There you'll see the pictures of some of the metal debris he talked about, and some other links as well. So until next time, if you haven't got your copy of UFO Matrix magazine, remember it's hit the newsagents now, so please do support it. And until next time, be safe.
If you like what you watch, then don't forget to follow us on Facebook and Twitter for the latest updates on The More Show. Remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel for new weekly television and radio shows. Visit themoreshow.co.uk/shop to purchase products and services from your favourite past guests. If you're new to this site, you can also catch up on the previous television and radio shows through YouTube and the More Show website.